My mom, Brenda, always said I was a quiet baby, born in the dead of a New England winter, christened that spring when the world outside our little Massachusetts town finally decided to stop being gray. My life, it seemed, began in watercolor's softness. There's a photo from my christening day that's been a fixture in our family forever. It's as much a part of the house as the scent of old wood and the sound of rain on the roof. There I am, this tiny, serious-looking lump in a ridiculously formal white gown. My parents, looking younger and so much less tired than I remember them, are on either side, smiling nervously for the camera. Behind them is Father Thomas from St. Giles Episcopal Church, his hand raised in a blessing. Sunlight, weak but trying its best, streams through the stained glass window above, throwing a slash of sapphire blue across the stone floor. I've seen that picture 1,000 times. It sat on the mantle, got tucked into a worn leather photo album, and now it exists as a high-res JPEG on my hard drive. I'm Alex Miller, and as a digital archivist for the local university, I'd taken it upon myself to digitize our family's fading memories for my mom's 60th birthday. That's when I saw him. My job makes me a professional pixel peeper. I zoom in, I adjust the contrast, I eliminate digital noise. I was meticulously cleaning up the yellowing of time from my mother's face, sharpening my dad's anxious smile. And then my eyes drifted to the far left corner of the frame, to the deep background to what should have been nothing but the cold, solid stone wall of St. Giles. A man. He was just standing there, in the shadows, almost lost against the old colonial stonework. Tall, dressed in a dark, old-fashioned suit. His hands were clasped in front of him, a formal, almost prayerful pose. But he wasn't looking at the altar or the stained glass window. He was looking right at us, at me. A weird, cold tingle crawled up my spine. I zoomed in further. His face was indistinct, blurred by the shadows and the grain of the old film, but I could feel that stare. A gaze that was still, patient, and endless. Here's the thing, though. Nobody could have been standing there. That wall is solid stone. There's no doorway, no alcove. It's the original outer wall of the church, part of a foundation that's been there before the Revolutionary War. Mom, I said into the phone later, my voice a little shaky. The picture from my christening. Was there anyone else there that day, besides us and Father Thomas? A pause on the other end, just the low hum of the daytime TV my mom always has on. Anyone else, Al? No, honey. It was just a private thing, remember? You sure? A tall guy, dark suit, standing way in the back by the stone wall? My mom's voice tightened. Alex, don't be ridiculous. There was no one there. I'm looking at my copy right now. It's just the wall. My heart started thumping. I'd checked the file's metadata. It was a direct scan from the original negative I'd found in a shoebox. No edits. No Photoshop. That night, I drove over to my parents' small clapboard house on the edge of town. My mom handed me her framed copy, the silver tarnished with age. She was right. Behind my family, the stone wall was completely, unambiguously empty. No man, no extra shadow. See, she said, her voice full of relief. Must be a glitch with your scanner or something. But I knew it wasn't a glitch. The cold pit in my stomach told me this was something else. Something that started 30 years ago and, for whatever reason, had only just decided to show itself to me. The next day, my mom insisted I go with her to see Father Thomas. He was long retired, living in a small clergyman's cottage behind the church. St. Giles itself still stood, a time-worn island of gray stone in the middle of our modern town. The smell of damp rock and old hymn books hit me as we walked in. Father Thomas was a frail old man now, his blue eyes sunken but still sharp. He looked at me with a kind of weary affection. I handed him my tablet, the digitized photo glowing on the screen. "Do you remember anyone else being here that day, Father?" I asked. He squinted at the screen. The silence stretched. His eyes didn't linger on my family. They went straight to that dark corner. The air in the small, cluttered room grew thick and heavy. I saw his breathing get shallow. His bony fingers trembled as he pinched the screen to zoom in, the exact same motion I had made. "Good Lord in heaven," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "You know him?" my mom asked, her voice trembling now too. Father Thomas didn't answer her. He looked up at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw genuine fear in a man of God. It wasn't the fear of sin or divine judgment. This was something primal, earthly, the fear of something that was here long before his prayers ever echoed off those stone walls. He muttered something under his breath in Latin, his voice gravelly. "Qui non operate est, sed qui videtur manate." Then, before we could even react, he did something I couldn't have imagined. He snatched the tablet from my hands, shuffled over to his small, sputtering fireplace, and tossed it in. My mom cried out. I just stared, frozen, as the plastic casing began to warp, the screen cracking as the flames licked at it, devouring the face of the man in the stone. "Father," I yelled, moving toward him, but he held up a hand to stop me. "Forget what you saw, Alex. It doesn't exist. It can't." "But what was it? Who was he?" "A shadow," he lied, but his eyes told a different story. "A trick of the light." He turned to me, gripping my arm. His hand was as cold as a gravestone. "And tonight," he said, his voice urgent, "sleep with a rosary, pray, and never go looking for him." As we were leaving, he added one final thing, words that seared themselves into my brain like a brand. "Because things like that," he whispered, "they don't fade, they follow."
Part 2. The Follower. Father Thomas's words turned out to be a brutal prophecy. Life didn't go back to normal. It was fractured. I tried to convince myself it was all just a weird coincidence, a combination of an overactive imagination and an old man's superstition. But the man's presence had planted a cold seed in my soul, and now it was starting to grow. A few days later, I was out for a beer with my girlfriend, Sarah, at a local brewery. Sarah was a history grad student, a practical, down-to-earth woman with a laugh that could cut through the gloomiest New England day. I told her the story, trying to frame it as a funny, quirky anecdote. And then he just chucks my $1,000 iPad right into the fireplace, I finished, trying to laugh. Sarah didn't laugh. She just watched me over the rim of her IPA. "Alex, that's really weird. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I lied. "Just a little freaked out." To prove it, to feel normal, I held up my phone. "Come on, let's take a selfie to commemorate the day I lost an expensive piece of electronics to a church ghost." We leaned our heads together, smiling for the camera. I snapped the picture. When I looked down at the screen to check it, my smile froze. through the big plate glass window of the brewery, on the street behind us, he was standing there. Same dark suit, same clasped hands, same empty stare, piercing through the glass, through the evening gloom, pinning me in place. "Oh my God," I breathed. "What?" Sarah asked, glancing at my phone. "It's a good picture. We look happy and slightly drunk." I looked from her face to the screen. In the photo, he was plain as day. But when I looked up at the real window, the street was empty, except for a couple walking their dog. "Nothing," I said, my voice hoarse. I quickly deleted the photo. My hand shook. "Let's take another one." But I didn't. The chill was back, 10 times worse. He wasn't trapped in a 30-year-old photograph anymore. He was out. He was here, now, and I was the only one who could see him. The following became relentless. It was subtle, but it was constant. I'd be at work staring at my computer, and in the brief black mirrored moment before the screensaver kicked in, I'd see his reflection standing behind my chair. I'd spin around. Nothing. I'd walk past a storefront and his reflection would glide across the glass. I'd glance into a puddle in a parking lot and his blurred face would stare back up at me. He was always there, in the periphery, on the edge of my reality, a silent passenger in my life. His patience was the most terrifying part. He did nothing. He didn't gesture, didn't threaten. He just watched, like a scientist studying a specimen, or an ancient god contemplating an offering. His silence was a scream inside my head. Sleep stopped being a refuge. It became another stage for his presence. And that's where the memories started coming back. Memories that weren't mine. I'd dream I was a baby again, lying in my old oak crib. It was the middle of the night. Moonlight slanted through the window, making a silver rectangle on the floor. And a figure was standing at the end of my crib. A boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, thin, with big, sad eyes. He didn't say anything, just stood there, his small hands gripping the wooden rails, staring down at me. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart hammering. I never had a brother. I was an only child. My mom had confirmed it 100 times, but the memory felt painfully real. I could remember the pattern of the wallpaper in the nursery, the feel of the wool blanket against my skin, and a strange smell in the room, the smell of damp earth and rotting leaves. I started to doubt my own sanity. Maybe my mom was right. Maybe I was just cracking up, stress from work, life pressure. But how could that explain Father Thomas's reaction? My obsession started to poison everything. I couldn't focus at work. I found myself compulsively scanning old photos in the university archive, looking for him in blurred crowds, in forgotten street scenes. My relationship with Sarah grew strained. "Alex, you need to talk to someone, a professional. You haven't been yourself." "You don't get it," I snapped. "He's real." "I want to believe you, I really do, but there's no proof. You delete every picture. You won't let me see anything." That's when I realized the genius of his method. He only appeared to me in fleeting moments I couldn't capture, couldn't prove. He was isolating me, turning me into an unreliable narrator of my own horror story.
That night, I decided I had to get proof. I knew he'd be there. He was always there. I waited until Sarah was asleep. I snuck into the living room and killed the lights. Our apartment was dark, except for the faint ambient glow of the city filtering through the blinds. I sat on the floor, facing our large TV, now just a black reflective rectangle. I took a deep breath, feeling his presence thicken the air, cold and heavy. I knew he was behind me. I raised my phone, switched to the front-facing camera, and looked at the screen. There I was, my face pale and drawn in the dim light, and there he was, over my shoulder, clearer than ever before. His face was still a void of shadow, but I could make out the shape of deep-set eyes. His clasped hands looked like they were carved from stone. My hand shaking, I hit the capture button. Then again and again. My camera roll now held 3 undeniable photos of my supernatural stalker. "See?" I whispered to myself, a wave of manic relief washing over me. I spun around, ready to confront the empty space where he stood. But he wasn't there. He was in the bedroom. A sharp, choked-off scream came from the other room, Sarah's scream. I scrambled into the room, my heart seizing in my chest. Sarah was sitting bolt upright in bed, eyes wide open with terror, pointing at the corner of the room. He was right there," she stammered, her voice frantic. "Looking at me. He was just standing there watching me sleep." I looked at the corner. It was empty, but the air there was freezing, and I could smell it, that scent from my dream, damp earth and decay. He had changed the rules. He was no longer just my observer. He was interacting with my world now, with the people I loved. His patience was over. I fumbled with my phone to show Sarah the pictures I'd just taken to prove she wasn't going crazy. But as I opened the photo gallery, my stomach dropped through the floor. The photos were all there, but the man was gone. It was just me, sitting alone in the dark living room, a wild, unhinged look on my face.
Part 3. The Silent Legacy. Seeing him changed everything. It was terrifying, but it was also a twisted kind of relief. I wasn't alone in this nightmare anymore. But it also meant the danger wasn't just mine to bear. We didn't stay in the apartment that night. We checked into a cheap motel and sat under the harsh fluorescent lights until dawn, wrapped in a shared silent dread. Sarah, the rational history student, was now a full believer. Her fear was as real as mine. "We have to do something, Alex," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "We can't live like this." I knew she was right. This wasn't something you could ignore or run from. I had to understand what he was and what he wanted.
My skills as an archivist were the only weapon I had. I decided to dig into the history of where it all started. St. Giles Episcopal Church. For the next few weeks, I buried myself in the town archives. I spent hours in the local library's history room, poring over brittle parish registers, faded maps, and forgotten books of New England folklore. Sarah, with her researcher's mind, was right there with me. Together, we started to piece together a story far older than the church's stone walls. St. Giles hadn't always been a Christian church. Its foundations were built over a much older pagan site, a place believed to hold a genius loci, a spirit of the place. The first colonists, in their letters, referred to it as the Silent Watcher. Local legends spoke of a quiet, unmoving entity that observed the passage of time and judged the souls that passed through its domain. When the first missionaries arrived, they didn't destroy the site. They built their church right on top of it, trying to consecrate the old spirit, to absorb it into the new faith. But some of the folklore suggested the entity was never truly conquered. It just adapted. It became part of the church, an unsanctioned saint, a silent guardian in the stone. And it required a sacrifice, or rather, a witness. We found scattered cryptic records across the centuries, priests' side notes about certain quiet children christened at St. Giles. These children, once every generation or two, were described as having a shadow that followed. They grew up to be recluses, haunted artists, or they simply vanished. An entry from 1887 by a parish priest made my blood run cold. He wrote of a young boy, Thomas Aiken, who constantly complained of the brother in the mirror. Thomas disappeared at the age of 17. His body was never found. Another record from 1952 described a young woman, Eleanor Vance, who painted hundreds of portraits of a tall, faceless man before taking her own life. I was the next in the line, chosen at my christening. The man in the stone wasn't a ghost. He was a position, a role, and he was preparing me for the succession. His observation was an acclimation process, a slow erosion of my soul until I was ready to take his place. And the memory of the brother at my crib, it wasn't a false memory. That boy was real. He was my predecessor, the one I was born to replace. The truth was worse than any nightmare. This wasn't a random haunting, it was a legacy. A curse passed down through a select line of souls. He wants you to become him, Sarah whispered, her face pale under the library lights. That's why he showed himself to me. He's pushing you out of your own life,
isolating you so you have nothing left to hold on to. Then we fight, I said, a cold determination rising in me. If I can't run, then I'll refuse. I'll break the chain.
Our plan was reckless, born of sheer desperation. We would go back to St. Giles at night. I would confront him at the very spot I was marked, the stone baptismal font. I wouldn't pray or perform an exorcism. I would perform an act of free will. I would reject his legacy. That night, a cold November rain lashed the streets of our town. We slipped into St. Giles through a side door Sarah, with her historian's eye, had identified as having a weak, old lock. Inside, the church was a different world from its daytime self. The darkness was thick, and the silence wasn't peaceful. It was the held-breath silence of something waiting. The air was heavy with the smell of cold stone and centuries of decay. "I'll wait here, by the door," Sarah whispered, gripping a small tire iron she'd brought. "If you're not back in 15 minutes. I nodded, not trusting my own voice. I walked alone down the main aisle, my footsteps echoing sacrilegiously in the holy space. I could feel him. His presence was everywhere, an invisible pressure on the air. I reached the font, a massive, ancient block of sandstone, its surface worn smooth by the hands of countless generations. I looked down into the stagnant water inside, and I saw him. Not a reflection. He was standing there, on the other side of the font, where there should have been empty space. He was solid, real, taller and more terrifying in person. His face was still a featureless void, a pit of shadow, but this time I could see his eyes, two cold, distant pinpricks of light like dead stars. There was no sound, but his voice bloomed inside my head, not in words, but in images and feelings. Eternity, silence, observation. I saw flashes of history through his eyes, the fall of the native tribes, the arrival of the first tall ships, the witch trials, the fires of revolution, the hum of the modern world, all seen by one unblinking gaze from the stillness of stone. He was showing me my future, an immortal witness to human folly, immune to pain and time, but stripped of all warmth, all love, all connection. Except, the voice resonated, your place is waiting. Behind him, hazy figures began to form. Thomas Aiken, the boy with the sad eyes, Eleanor Vance, the tormented artist, and the boy from my dream, my direct predecessor. They stood there, a chain of trapped souls, their empty eyes pleading with me to join them, to relieve them of their watch. The temptation was sickening, an end to the fear, a cold peace. But then I thought of Sarah, her laugh, the warmth of her hand in mine, the future we'd planned, normal, boring, and beautiful. I thought of jokes, the taste of a good beer, the feeling of sun on my skin, all the small, fleeting, human things this creature could never understand. "No!" I said, my voice ringing out,
a human sound in the ancient silence. I held up my phone, my tool of modern observation. I looked into his empty eyes and said, "I am not you. I am Alex Miller, and I refuse."
With a scream of rage and fear, I smashed my phone against the stone lip of the font. The screen shattered. Shards of glass and plastic rained into the water. For a moment, everything erupted. A frigid wind tore through the church, extinguishing the candles on the altar. The ghostly figures behind him let out a collective shriek, a sound of centuries of disappointment and pain. The form of the man in the stone began to shimmer and dissolve like smoke. And then, silence. He was gone. The heavy presence was lifted. The air felt lighter. I stumbled back, my legs like lead. Sarah ran to me, throwing her arms around me. "It's over," I gasped. "I think it's over." Part 4. The Echo in the Future. For the next few months, it seemed like I was right. The silence was back, but this time it was real silence. There was no man in the photos, no reflection in the periphery. The dreams of the boy at the crib stopped. The fear, like a long fever, finally broke. Sarah and I left Oak Haven. We couldn't stay. Not in a town where every stone corner whispered memories we were desperate to forget. We moved to a bright, small apartment in Denver, far from the ghosts of the East Coast. I got a new job. We began to heal. We lived. A year later, Sarah got pregnant. The joy I felt was overwhelming, a tidal wave of emotion so powerful it washed away the last scars of the past. We were having a family, a new start, untainted by ancient curses. The first ultrasound was a magical moment. We stared at the grainy black and white screen, at the tiny curled form of our unborn child, a beating heart, a promise. The doctor printed out a few pictures for us, precious, blurry images that we stared at all the way home. That evening, sitting on the couch in our bright new home, I pulled out my phone. "I have to send this to my mom," I said to Sarah, my smile so wide it hurt. I laid the ultrasound printout on the coffee table, lined up my phone to get a clear shot. I snapped the picture, and then, old habit, a twitch from a darker time, made me look closely at the phone screen before I hit send. The blood went cold in my veins. The air hitched in my throat. The joy shattered into a million icy pieces. The photo on my phone showed the grainy black and white landscape of the ultrasound. I could see the tiny curled form of our unborn child, and behind it, deep in the shadows of the image, faint but unmistakable, was a figure. A tall figure, hands clasped, just watching. I had been wrong, so horribly, naively wrong. The man in the stone had never wanted me. He didn't care about me any more than he cared about the others before me. We were just vessels, bridges. He wanted the lineage. The chain wasn't broken. I hadn't escaped it. I had just passed it on. The curse wasn't following me anymore, because it had found a new host, a fresh, malleable soul. It was following my child. And I realized the final terrible truth. I was going to spend the rest of my life seeing him, not in my own pictures, but in my child's. I would be the witness to my own kids' haunting, helpless to watch the cycle begin again. My watch had just begun.